Welcome to another NBA 2K official ratings update review video. As always, I'm Pete Toll, aka PT Sports 84, bringing you the latest official NBA 2K content through roster editing, as well as highlighting some of the best community rosters on the channel. So please, before we get into this video, make sure you click the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So this is the third player ratings update. Today is December the 4th, 2025. Getting a late start this morning just because, number one, the update came out late, and two, I had some work stuff that I was completing. Got to dive back into that right when I'm done with this video. So going to try to make it short and sweet, not really dive into a lot of analysis unless we have to. As always, we start with the Philadelphia 76ers. Tyrese Maxey finally gets a much-needed update, +2 to a 92 overall. Andre Drummond gets a +1 to a 79. Jared McCain, +1 to a 77. Justin Edwards drops -1 to a 75. Adeem Bona goes +1 to a 74. And then Dominique Barlow goes +3 to a 74. One thing I'd like 2K to look at is some of these players that are way overrated. Somebody like Kyle Lowry, who's barely hanging on to the NBA because he's getting ready to retire, I presume, just based on him doing on-air analysis of games while he's still a player. They got to lower him under guys that are in the rotation, but it's kind of been a long-standing issue with 2K and the ratings. They don't pay attention to guys that aren't really playing in that cycle. They really should, though. Moving on to the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll get news today on the MRI on Giannis. Had a weird calf injury. Hopefully it's not Achilles. We will see. Their ratings, I don't know how Ryan Rollins didn't go up a little bit more, but that's okay. We did, however, get Kyle Kuzma switching back to power forward. He goes to an 80 +2 overall. Kevin Porter Jr. is back healthy in the lineup, starting at the 2, which they made that position change as well. +2 for him to a 78. Cole Anthony has been really bad. I don't know how he didn't drop. Position change for AJ Green. He goes +1 to a 77. He's now the starting small forward. Gary Trent drops -1 to a 75 as well. Position change for Gary Harris to small forward, as he's kind of coming in as the backup for Green. Going over to the Chicago Bulls. Only two quick changes for them. We get +1 for Nikola Vucevic to an 84, and then Ayu Dosunmu gets a +1 to a 79 overall. So not much changing for the Bulls there. Quick note for them: Noah Asenge is out for the year with a shoulder. He's having shoulder surgery, so hopefully next year he'll get a chance to develop. We will see. Moving over to the Cleveland Cavaliers. They have some changes. Darius Garland -2 to an 85. -1 for Jared Allen to an 84. Jalen Tyson gets a big boost, +3 to a 79. Lonzo Ball drops -1 to a 76. Naquan Tomlin gets a considerable bump, +3 to a 74. And then last but not least, Tyrese Proctor, +2 to a 72. Moving over to the Boston Celtics, Jaylen Brown is a 92 overall, +1. He has been so efficient in the mid-range this year. Peyton Pritchard goes +2 to an 83, while Derek White goes -1 to an 83. Anthony Simons goes +1 to a 79. Neemias Queta goes +2 to a 78. Jordan Walsh gets a slight boost, +2 to a 75. We get Sam Hauser, -1 to a 75. He gets a position change to power forward. We get Hugo Gonzalez, +2 to a 73. And then Baylor Shireman, +2 to a 73. As you'll notice, they kind of changed out some of the positions for guys as well. So Shireman is now a small forward. That pretty much leaves like nobody, I believe, at the 2 behind White, which is weird. Um, I know Gonzalez has kind of come in a little bit as a 2. Maybe you could switch him back down. 2K is going to 2K, I guess. Um, Going over to the Clippers. News for them, obviously, Chris Paul um, no longer with the team. They haven't waived or traded him yet, but 2K did put him in the free agent pool. He is a -1 to a 74 also, so they made that change. James Harden goes +1 to a 90. I don't think so. I think he should be way higher, considering he's 36 years old. Playing like he's playing, he's at least a 92. We get John Collins going -1 to a 77. Brooke Lopez has been abysmal this year. He only goes -1 to a 76. And then we go down to Kobe Sanders, only getting a +1 bump despite being considerable in the rotation. They did make a change yesterday with Rage Dennis getting the two-way spot. Jamil Telfort got waived. They did change the position back for Kobe Brown. I swear that was a oversight on their part by accident. Based on positions, I think they got the Kobe's confused on the roster because nowhere has Kobe Brown been a small forward. Going to the Grizzlies, Zach Edey +2 to a 81. I thought he could get a little bit more bump to like an 82, 83. Personally, he's been really good for them. And as you noticed, when he returned, that's when they started turning things around. Jalen Wells gets a +1 bump to a 77. Likewise with Jock Landale. Vince Williams Jr. gets position change to point guard, a +2 bump for him to a 76. We get Cam Spencer +1 bump to a 75. John Conchar -1 to a 74. Olivier Maxine Prosper +1 to a 73, while Gigi Jackson drops -1 to a 73. Quick news: as of this recording, Kobe Buffkin's hardship expired, but as with Garrison Matthews, those usually don't get announced until usually later in the afternoon or the next day. So if they're going to keep him, that might get announced later, or if they swap somebody else in, that'll be something that 2K has to change. We will see. Going over to the Atlanta Hawks. So we have Kristaps Porzingis +1 to an 86. Dyson Daniels +1 to an 83. +1 for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Hell of a season for him so far. Zachary Richeche -1 to a 78. And then beat Creasy +1 to a 76. Position change for Luke Kennard back to shooting guard. Moving over to the Miami Heat. Questionable here. Bam Adebayo goes a -1. Believe I have that right. I might have wrote my note wrong, but I think he was an 89 to begin with. I think he went -1 to an 88. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but +1 for Tyler Hero to an 87. He switches back to shooting guard. We then get Jaime Jaquez Jr. going -1 to an 80. Davion Mitchell +1 to a 78. And then Kashad Johnson, all the way down here, goes +1 to a 70. We go over to the Charlotte Hornets. LaMelo Ball drops -2 to an 86. Con Knipple goes +1 to an 83. Miles Bridges +1 to an 82. Colin Sexton +1 to an 80. Mason Plumlee +1 to a 76. I don't know how, considering he barely plays. But then we got Trey Mann sitting here to 74. And those definitely should flip-flop, if I'm being honest. Going over to the Utah Jazz. -1 for Lauri Markkanen to an 87. Ace Bailey gets a +3 bump to a 78. He's been playing really well for them. Isaiah Collier -1 to a 70, or -2 to a 77. He's been struggling scoring, even though his assists are there. And then we go down to the bottom. Kevin Love +1 to a 74. Sacramento Kings. -1 to an 83 for both Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. Meanwhile, Keegan Murray gets a +1 to an 81. Keon Ellis falls again, -1 to a 75. And then this is where I have issue with 2K. Like, they bump these centers up so high so quick, but then guards take forever to get bumped up to a proper rating. Maxime Reynaud gets a +4 to a 74. I don't have an issue with that, but like when you look at other players that bump up, the guards seem to be a slower progression a little bit. And they're quick to rate these centers that play spot minutes pretty high. So that's just one critique I have. New York Knicks, we have Karl-Anthony Towns moving to center. No change for Mikal Bridges, who's been starting at the 3. I'll be interested to see what happens when Anunoby returns. We get Mikal Bridges going +1 to an 86. Josh Hart, +3 to an 81. Mitchell Robinson, -2 to a 78. Miles McBride goes +1 to a 77. Yershon Yabusele, -1 to a 74. And then Tyler Kolek gets a +2 bump to a 73 overall. Moving over to the LA Lakers, LeBron James only drops 2 points despite averaging like 15 a game. I don't understand. I would at least dropped him to a 90 right now, like if not further. He's just not been himself, and I know all the LeBron Laker fans are going to come attack me. That it is what it is, but you know, at this point, LeBron is not a 92. You still got him at an 85 dunk. You've still got him at 89 vertical, 87 speed. Like, let's be for real. Like, if we're being honest, LeBron is not the same LeBron, but he is 40 years old, turning 41 later this month. So, just interesting. Austin Reeves gets a +1 bump to an 89. DeAndre Ayton +1 to an 83. Rui Hachimura -1 to a 79. Jake LaRavia -1 to a 76. +1 for Jackson Hayes to a 76. Moving over to the Orlando Magic, +1 for Franz Wagner to an 87. +1 for Desmond Bane to an 84. Wendell Carter Jr. +1 to an 80. Anthony Black +1 to an 80. -1 for Tristan De Silva to a 77. Not sure about that one. Jett Howard somehow goes +4 to a 76. I think that's a little much, considering, but Noah Penda goes +2 to a 74. Going over to the Dallas Mavericks. Position change for Anthony Davis to center. And then Cooper Flagg goes +1 to an 81. PJ Washington +1 to an 80. -1 for Daniel Gafford to a 78. Max Christie +1 to a 77. Position change for Najee Marshall to power forward as well. D'Angelo Russell goes -1 to a 77. +1 for Klay Thompson to a 77. And then Ryan Nembhard climbs +8 to a 76. I thought you could at least do 77, considering Brandon Williams and D'Angelo Russell are the backups to Nembhard, who is starting at point guard. They did add 8 badges. I will let the Real 2K Insider dive into those badges more. Hopefully we get a face scan for him as well at some point. Brooklyn Nets +2 for Michael Porter Jr. to an 86. -1 for Nick Claxton to an 81. Igor Damon +3 to a 76. +1 for Noah Clowney to a 75. +2 to a 75 for Tyrese Martin. +3 to both Drake Powell and Danny Wolf to a 74. And that's your ratings changes, but position change for Jalen Wilson to small forward as well in this one. And then I thought we get Danny Wolf to power forward. Yep, I thought I have that on my notes. I didn't want to miss it. Denver Nuggets +2 for Jamal Murray to an 88. Cam Johnson +1 to an 80. Position change for Peyton Watson to power forward. Bruce Brown -1 to a 75. Position change for Julian Strawther to small forward. Spencer Jones gets a bump +3 to a 73. And then Hunter Tyson, position change to power forward. Moving over to the Indiana Pacers, Andrew Nembhard +1 for him to an 81. Jay Huff gets a boost +3 to a 77. Jarris Walker +1 to a 76. And then Isaiah Jackson +2 to a 76. We also get Ethan Thompson added on a two-way contract, so he's now officially correct on the roster. Moving over to the New Orleans Pelicans, Sadiq Bey gets a bump +2 to a 79. Jeremiah Fears gets a bump +2 to a 79. Yves Missi gets a drop -1 to a 76. And then we get all the way down here, we get Micah Peavy +2 to a 73. Bryce McGowan's +3 to a 73. But oddly, no change to Jordan Hawkins to match McGowan's. No boost for Alvarado, despite him playing really well in the absence of other guys. So with Zion being out, other guys are going to be asked to be stepping up. So we'll see. Going over the Detroit Pistons, Jalen Duren +1 to an 88. Tobias Harris +1 to a 81. Somehow Karis LeVert's a 79 +1. We do get Isaiah Stewart +1 to a 78, and then Ron Holland -1 to a 75. I thought they could dip Jenkins down a tiny bit. Same with Ivy. Maybe a -1 for each, but like I said, 2K is going to do what they want. And then we have the Toronto Raptors. Just a couple 3 changes for them. Scotty Barnes +1 to an 88. No injury for RJ Barrett. The injuries have been brutal, like they always are with 2K, always behind. We have Colin Murray Boyles -1 to a 76. And then Jacoby Walter +1 to a 74. Meanwhile, Jonathan Mogbo, who's been out of the rotation pretty much for a while, still stays at a 74. You couldn't have dropped him -1. It is what it is, I guess, at this point. Houston Rockets +1 for Jabari Smith to an 81. We get position change for Amen Thompson back to the shooting guard spot, even though last night Josh Kogi started at the 2 again. I guess it's just matchup fluid. Reed Shepard +1 to an 80. Steven Adams +1 to a 78. Okogie is -1 to a 76. And then Aaron Holiday +2 to a 75. They also added Tyler Smith on a two-way contract. Kevon Harris was waived. Moving over to the San Antonio Spurs, De'Aaron Fox gets a boost +2 to an 87. +1 to an 82 for Devin Vassell. +1 for Dylan Harper to an 80. +1 for Keldon Johnson to a 79. -1 for Jeremy Sohan to a 76. Julian Champagnie +2 to a 75. And then David Jones Garcia, position change to point guard, +2 to a 70. Phoenix Suns, Devin Booker, is out for a week. We'll see if that is a week or it's longer. Meanwhile, Mark Williams gets a bump +2 to an 82. Somehow Colin Gillespie only gets a +2 despite really stepping up off the bench lately. Jordan Goodwin gets a +2 bump to a 75. Finally, Oso Iguodaro gets a bump +1. And then Jamari Boye gets +3 to a 70. I think Malawach needs to drop. Richards needs to drop. Dunn could drop. But it is what it is. We go to OKC. Not much for them, honestly. They have an interesting lineup complexity whenever Hartenstein comes back because Holmgren right now is starting at center, and then Jalen Williams starts at power forward. That is not reflected here, but we'll see what happens. However, ratings wise, Casey Wallace +1 to an 80, and then Jalen Williams +1 to a 76. So not much there. Last couple of teams, Minnesota Timberwolves -1 for Julius Randle to an 87, -1 to a 76 for Mike Conley Jr. Portland Trailblazers +1 for Danny Avdia to an 88, Jeremy Grant +1 to an 82, Donovan Clingan +2 to an 82, Chris Murray +1 to a 74, Sidi Sissoko gets a position change to shooting guard, goes +2. Caleb Love goes +4 to a 72 with a position change to point guard. Golden State Warriors. Moses Moody goes -1 to a 78. Quentin Post goes +1 to a 76. Gary Payton II goes +1 to a 76. Last but not least, the Washington Wizards +1 for Alex Sarr to an 84. CJ McCollum +2 to an 81. Corey Kispert is a +2 to a 78. Cam Whitmore, position change to power forward, +1 to a 77. Chris Middleton goes +1 to a 77. And then Justin Champagnie, goes to small forward. And then last but not least, AJ Johnson goes -1 to a 73. Meanwhile, Bilal Coulibaly just announced that he's going to be out multiple weeks. Unfortunately, he just cannot stay healthy for them. But this has been your official player ratings update review. Please make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll keep bringing you all the latest and greatest official and community-based roster content that I can throughout. So just please make sure you're sharing the video everywhere you can. It really, really helps. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Really quick, also, no shoes added. We're still missing the Tatum 4s, the Embiid 1s, the Harden 10s, all the ones that are in the PC files. They are not available on the console edition right now, so 2K's got to get it together. Don't know what's delaying it at this point, but it is what it is. But thanks everybody for watching. Stay safe and take care.